What I'd like to do is I'd like to give Ginger the floor, because she has contested these 4 books, and I think she has a message about the situation. So if you would, take it away.
Okay, so before I go into the specifics about these books, I want to give you a little bit of my personal history. So I am not a Nassau County native. I was born and raised in the Detroit metro area. I married a sailor in my early 20s, and then he slowly moved me down the East Coast to Florida because he's from Georgia, so he's like, we're gonna live in the South. As a child, I was groomed, abused, and trafficked by family members and individuals in my church. So when I speak of how a child is influenced and groomed, it is from personal experience. It's not stuff I read on the internet, it's not a movie I saw, it is my personal life experience. I've heard people say things like, well, you know, abuse isn't the same as a loaded gun. However, the majority of children who are sexually exploited or abused find themselves abusing drugs, living a life of prostitution, and attempting or committing suicide at a very, very high rate. It is an extremely, extremely detrimental experience for any human being. It should never be dismissed or ignored or diminished as to something that happens somewhere else. So while there are many different reasons to contest books, some of them are based on your faith, some of them are based on what you believe is morally appropriate for students to read. For me, it is a risk mitigation factor, right? So the books that I have contested, and you guys all have what I'm going to talk about tonight in front of you. The books that I've personally contested are Tricks by Ellen Hopkins, A Court of Mist and Fury, which is actually a series of books, Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, and The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Now, Tricks to me personally is extraordinarily obscene and disgusting, simply because it beautifies and glorifies the climax of a child while they are being forcibly raped by a person who has purchased them for their entertainment. So for me, that is extraordinarily personal, and there's no excuse for any child to be exposed to that content in a school setting. There's no need for it. There are other stories, there are news reports that you could use to educate children about the trafficking of human beings, about grooming, about all of those things without the romanticization of the activity. Okay. One of the main reasons that children do not report is that they will feel physical pleasure during the abuse that they endure. And so therefore it creates an extraordinarily cognitive dissonance between the reality of this feels good, but I know it's bad. And as a child, which whether you like it or not, a student in a school is a child. They are not an adult. I don't care what number is next to their name. They're still a child because they're still in that relationship of quid pro quo. I do this, you get that. There is a sphere of influence and authority over them. They are a child, okay? And they have been institutionalized. It's a good institution. I love our schools. But they've been institutionalized to trust and respect the authority that is over them, right? So if a teacher or a person of influence is telling them that this is good, even though they feel it's bad, it can create a level of confusion where the child doesn't know what to do. Okay, so the main reason that I am contesting these books is to remove the heightened risk of grooming materials, okay? So Tricks specifically references the abuse and trafficking of children. The way that it is described, the sexual intercourse, the sexual activities, is grotesquely romanticized. It's disgusting to me. I'm not gonna read the things out loud right now. They were in my report. I will be reading them at the school board meeting. The other 3 titles, A Court of Mist and Fury, Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, and The Perks of Being a Wallflower, have explicit sexual content where the intent of the writer is to arouse the reader. That is pornographic by legal terms. So again, I am a Christ-loving Christian. My argument is not solely based on my faith. It is the legal parameters within which these books fall, okay? In addition to that, there's an issue with the command and control of the materials, right? So right now, district policy is that certain titles are restricted to 18 and up. That is less than 9% of our student body. right? So if the material is not even accessible to 90%, 91% of the students, there really is no fiscal or legitimate reason to have the materials in our schools, right? So they're not benefiting the majority of students. We don't need to be spending money on them. So that's one just logistical reason. Secondly, some of them are in the general library, which means any student, whether they have parental consent to have access to those materials or not, can walk up, take it off the shelf, and read it. Now, if they don't have parental consent, it means they can't check it out. It doesn't mean they can't see it sitting in the library, okay? The third aspect of that command and control is once someone does check out that explicit content, the school has no way to control its distribution. That is a fair, logical, and realistic statement. So if student A checks out tricks, which is supposed to be restricted based on its explicit, obscene, and pornographic content, there is nothing stopping student A from handing it or accidentally exposing another student to that content. That is a clear, even though it's unintentional, violation of my parental rights. I do not want my child to see that book, which means they should have no avenue of approach or access to it, period. The next argument will be, well, they can see it on their phones. Okay, great. Let's go back to the grooming, right? So, grooming is the systematic and intentional exposure of children to information and activities that we all know as reasonable human beings are inappropriate for them, right? Or detrimental to their physical, mental, spiritual health. The point of grooming is to very slowly introduce these things and give them access to these things in a way that seems appropriate. So seeing it on their phone, how many of our kids look at stuff on their phones that they're not supposed to look at? I have 3 teenagers. They look at stuff they're not supposed to look at. But I check their phones and they know that there's going to be ramifications for their actions, right? Grooming would use materials that are available in a school library to give those materials a validity that they don't deserve to have, right? Well, this is available in the library, so it's okay, right? Oh, well, this is a school book. You can read this with me. It gives a credibility to that material that a child would have a hard time arguing against. Well, it came from my teacher. Well, it came from the library. Well, the kid in school checked it out, so it must be okay. And it adds on these little caveats and notes that are very difficult for a child or a student to argue against. Because here it is with the Hilliard Middle School stamp on it. Here it is with the Fernandina Beach High School stamp on it. So it says it's from the library, it must be okay. Okay, so one example of that is a teacher in Miami who used the book Lolita over a period of 8 to 10 years to sexually exploit multiple female students. He was not caught for almost a decade. Why? Because he used a book that was on the approved curriculum list to expose children to sexual content, explain to them why it was good, how it would be good for them, and then he groomed them to the point where he could abuse them. Okay, so this is not some far off fetched, this doesn't happen here. It is happening. It can happen. It will happen. It does happen. What I am going to be approaching the school board aggressively, consistently, and diligently is to say, let's put the safety and security of our students above the morality debate, because I can stand here and debate that this book is gross for this reason. And you can stand here on this side and debate that this book is great because it's an artistic expression. Meanwhile, there's somebody in the middle that's flying under the radar that it could be using it to hurt our kids. That is never okay, right? So if a child makes a threat within our school districts, what happens? Sheriff Leeper gets called, they get arrested, they get permanent charges put out them, and now they're posting their picture on the internet. We need to have the same posture and approach when it comes to materials that are in our schools that our children may be exposed to. Okay, there's a couple other facets that I'm gonna be talking with the school board about, and I wanna make this very clear, and I'm really glad you're here, Dr. Burns. For me, this is not a personal attack on any school administrative member. This is not a personal attack on a school board member. It is not an attack on you. I am going to be calling into question, what is the policy, what is the procedure, and who is going to be held accountable when things fall short? Because at the end of the day, we're human beings. No one is perfect. It is our responsibility as the constituents, as the adults, to go to our school board and say, what is your policy on when the publishers give you your list? When they say, hey, here's 300 titles we'd like to bring into your schools for this amount of money. What is the policy for who reviews those titles? When it comes to the more mature content, which individual, not committee, not group, not department, which individual does the buck stop with on reviewing the mature, obscene content? What is the specific language in Nassau County that determines this isn't even gonna be entertained because it has this many swear words? We can set a number on it where it just doesn't even meet the threshold. We don't even need to read it because it's a no. What is the specific language that determines what is obscene, what is pornographic? Because there's state law already established on that. And our rules and our policies should be more stringent, not less, because then we're falling short, okay? If books are currently in our libraries that have been there since before these statutes were written, who's responsible to go and review them and pull them off the shelves proactively so that we can save the taxpayers money? How much is this school attorney costing us going to court? How much does it cost when people do a public records request? And you gotta assign a staff member to sit here and pull all this stuff. It costs taxpayers money. So there's a fiduciary responsibility, there's a risk mitigation responsibility, and then there's an exposure responsibility. So again, I brought up the fact that if a student has a book, they can pass it to anybody they want. If that student's 18 years old, let me ask, do we have any law enforcement officers in here? Any lawyers, attorneys? Okay. So if you are at home and you have pornographic material and you negligently leave it out and your children see it and then pass it around, you will be held responsible.
Contributing to the delinquency of a minor.
Correct. So if that 18-year-old student checks out a pornographic book and their middle school brother picks it up and then goes and shares it with his friends, who's responsible? Who is ultimately responsible for exposing the minor children to the school material that was approved?
I would say the school.
Right,
Personally.
you would think that,
I
right?
personally would say the school.
And those are the types of floodgate issues that I have with these titles, okay? So everything that I've talked about tonight, I've got references for it. I have case studies in here. You can follow the links. You can take this home. I would like to have a mature and reasonable discussion about these titles, about their content. And the bottom line is, if something has been on the shelves for 10 years, it's not likely that the people who are currently sitting on the school board, the people who are currently in the administration, said yes to those titles 10, 15 years ago. But we do have an opportunity now to say, you know what? We didn't do it well in the past. We could have done it better in the recent present, and we will improve it in the future. This doesn't have to be an emotional discussion. It doesn't have to be a character destruction. It can be a mature conversation about what is currently available in our libraries, how long it's been there, what benefit and purpose does it serve, and does it need to remain accessible to students? Because if it's accessible to one, it's accessible to all. And you cannot argue that with me, because right now, Trix has been lost from the Hilliard Middle Senior High School for 10 years. For 10 years, it has been lost, which means obscene pornographic material left Hilliard Middle Senior High School, and we have no idea where it is, who's been looking at it, or what happened to it, which for me is top tier problem. Okay, so thank you for listening to me. I'm happy to answer questions. Yes.
Just two wrinkles. One, at the litigation matters workshop, in the course of the conversation that took place, district administrator admitted that numerous of the books that had been removed were found in classroom libraries in addition to school libraries,
Yes.
which brings a whole nother
Correct.
situation where a specific teacher chose
Correct.
to take that book and have that book available in a classroom library to the students in his or her classroom.
Yes.
And item number two is that when we first started this process, the CDF process of having books removed, we had a conversation about what would what would the equivalent be if one of us took one of these books and handed it to a middle school student? And the answer we got was you would be charged with
Correct.
third-degree felony.
Correct.
So that's the equivalent of what is happening that's happening on a sanctioned basis within the school. So you have that happening through the library, and I agree with you 100% that particularly the example of a book that has mysteriously vanished for 10 years, and the fact that we don't know where that book is going.
Correct.
And so whatever the age restriction might be for the book is worthless once that book
Correct.
goes off the premise.
Once a child checks it out of the library, there is no command and control. So I served in the Army for 15 years, right? And I was issued a rifle from the armor. That serial number was assigned to me. If I lost my weapon, I'm in trouble. The same isn't true of these books with these students. If the student loses the book, it's, oh, okay, it's lost. Not, oh crap, we just lost the porn book at the middle school. We have to find that. We need to call parents and say, hey, this book had explicit content. We need it back. You need to look for the house, right? Or there needs to be ramifications for it. The reality is, some of this content, I'm not going to pretend like I've never read a smut book. I'm not going to pretend that I am a Navy wife. He was gone a lot. I've read some books. Some of these books, especially the Court of Mist and Fury and all of that, it's a 3-part series, and it's smut. If grown 40-year-old women want to read it, they can read it. They can buy it at Target, they can download it on their e-reader, whatever they want. It is not appropriate to have pornographic materials in our schools. And again, pornographic is defined as material intended by the author to arouse or entice the reader or viewer. It's a very simple definition. It's not up for a whole lot of debate. And when you read the books and it has the words and it says the things and you're like, ooh, that's a little racy. I wouldn't read this in front of my 16-year-old daughter. Then you know what you're reading. And I think we are reasonable, responsible, prudent adults. Where if I can read this to a child and say this is from school, and I can tell a 16-year-old girl, go ahead and check that out of the library because it's not in the 18 and up section. Why don't you check that book out? It's got really great stories. It's such a nice story. It's got such a good story. And now she's talking to you about a book that's filled with sexually pornographic content. She's talking to her teacher. And he's able to have conversations, or she's able to have conversations that otherwise would be completely out of left field, and you'd be like, whoa, weirdo, creep. But we're talking about a book that I checked out of the library. So just some information about statistical breakdowns of misconduct in Florida, and I want this to be very clear. I am not anti-teacher. I love our teachers, love our schools, love our kids. I volunteer, I donate times and services. I love our schools and I love our teachers. But this happens, and it's true. And we can't ignore that it happens. What we need to do is fight against it ever happening here to a level where we're throwing somebody in jail for the rest of their life, right? So the gender of victims, 72% are female, 28% are male. I will say this, males are much less likely to report. Males are much less likely to report. Gender of perpetrators, 89% were male, 10% female. This is the part that really fires me up about why these books don't belong in high school, is that most cases occur in high school, particularly between 9th and 12th grade. Right? People go, oh, well, no, grooming starts when they're like 6. No, it usually starts when they're in puberty and they're curious about sexual interaction. It is the prime time to grab yourself a kid, okay? Middle school students, 6 through 8, are about 15%. On average, it takes between 6 months and 3 years for a child to report their abuse. And that is usually because, one, they're afraid of hurting the teacher. Yes, I'm serious. They're worried about hurting the person who's hurting them, or they're very confused about the nature of the relationship they had. It feels good. It can't be bad. It feels good. It can't be bad. They're nice to me. They love me. No, they don't. They're a predator who needs to be held accountable to the highest extent of the law, okay? And then, as I mentioned, earlier reports have been raised about the individual, whether it's their behavior, other kids saying, hey, you know, this teacher creeps me out. hey, I had this interaction with a staff member and it didn't sit right with me, and they're reporting it, but it's not to the level where the school would take aggressive action. And it's only found out later that, okay, we actually have a problem here, right? So, again, all of those references are in there. And I think some of the things that we've discussed tonight, Dr. Burns, if you would ever like to have a conversation with me, Dr. Burns, if you'd ever like to have a conversation with me, I'd be happy to do so. But I would hope that this would give a more objective and specific approach to why these books are challenged. You may find something offensive that I don't, right? There are certain books, like A Tale of Two Cities, I believe, begins with a sexual assault in the first like 2 chapters. That is very, very different than Tricks. Okay? There are other books, Count of Monte Cristo, there are beautiful, beautiful books that have literary importance that are a different level than A Court of Mist and Fury, right? One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is not the same as The Perks of Being a Wallflower. It's not the same, and we have to stop saying things like, we should never ban books. No one's asking you to ban the book. Buy it at the store, get it at the public library, go buy it on your Kindle. What we're asking is for there to be prudent judgment applied to what materials are available in our school libraries paid for with taxpayer dollars. So a few things that you can do as we move forward is obviously you can challenge books. I would request that you do that from an educated standpoint. Read the book, know what is in it, not just the blurb, not just a little pull from it. Know what the book is cover to cover. Have a specific complaint about it, not just that it's obscene in this way and it's available to these students and these are the parameters I'd like it either removed or governed better. Contact your school board member, so whoever it is in your area. I kind of have 2 because I have kids at Fernandina Beach High School, but I live in Yulee. Contact them, start the conversation with them. Don't let it be an echo chamber. CC everybody. Their emails are public record, they are public servants. Go through the informal and formal process. Don't just whine on Facebook. Go through the process, do the work, have the conversation, and then finally read aloud. There is Florida law that if the school board denies you the opportunity to read a book that's currently in our schools, and they deny you to read it based on the obscenity statute, it has to be removed from circulation. That is Florida law. That's not my opinion. It's not an idea. That is law. So if there's a book that is obscene, read it. Read it, because if it's not appropriate for the school board meeting, it's definitely not appropriate for students. Okay. So any other questions for me? Okay. Thank you. My pleasure.